More and more people seem to be understanding that on both sides, Democratic and Republican, these primary contests that we've seen in various ways haven't necessarily been all that democratic. And it's become so obvious that even Morning Joe has started to discuss it. You'll see that here.
Bernie Sanders' winning streak continued over the weekend with a victory in the Wyoming caucuses on Saturday. Sanders beat Hillary Clinton by 12 points, 56-44, notching his 8th win in the last 9 nominating contests.
Okay, what do we do here?
I mean, it sounds like he's winning.
He's won 8 out of 9.
Yep.
But he's losing.
And look, he wins by 12 points. I tell you, I would not do well as a Democratic politician. He wins by 12 points. He may not even pick up a single delegate.
Yeah.
It's 7-6 now, with a remaining delegate to be decided later. I'm sorry. That's a crushing victory.
I know. And listen, I think that with the super delegates that they have, I think she only has to win 30% of the, she only has to get 30% of the vote in the remaining contest. I mean, talk about voters feeling like a system might be rigged.
Why are you even voting?
If you're driving in a car right now, we've been talking about rigged systems. We're putting up right now a graphic. Bernie Sanders wins 56-44% in Wyoming. The delegates rewarded. Hillary Clinton 11, Bernie Sanders 7. Why does the Democratic Party even have voting booths?
No, why?
This system is so rigged.
But we always talk about voter turnout and how important it is to do your duty as a citizen. There's absolutely no reason any of those people voted in any of those states,
I mean,
right?
What's the justification for
Please,
that?
someone tell me.
These are the rules.
No, that's not a good answer. Tell me why those people needed to go vote.
So you see there, I'm shocked that Mika and Joe have that opinion, although, especially for Joe, since he seems to be a Trump supporter, anything, I guess, theoretically that hurts Hillary Clinton, he's probably going to be in favor of. But while they go a little bit far in terms of saying there was no point in anybody going to vote, well, no, if nobody went to vote, then we'd have a bigger problem, I think. And I know that you don't necessarily agree with everything.
I don't necessarily agree because I'm 100% right. The facts, they don't back. Joe Scarborough is dishonest on a daily basis, and he was dishonest there. And for Joe Scarborough to talk about what's the point of Democrats voting when his party proudly tries to keep people from voting, it's freaking outrageous and incredibly disingenuous. He gets a 0. If PolitiFact were going to fact check that, he'd get an F.
So, Ben, can you break it down
for
the
I'd love
audience?
to.
Because I want people to understand how the system works and why it is he can win by 12 points but still have the same amount of delegates as him.
Okay,
fewer delegates in the end.
Well,
yeah, so
okay,
how
but
did this end up?
Because they included, without explaining that they were including, they included 4 super delegates
they talked
from
about
Wyoming.
It there. They didn't
Yeah,
show
but by the time the
explicitly in
graphic came up,
graphics.
they didn't have it. It was
Yeah.
no, that's not journalism. That's a failure. You don't put up that made it seem like she just flat out won 11 delegates to Bernie's 7.
Right.
Well, look, I do think they could have been more explicit, but they were talking about superdelegates. If they never mentioned it, then it would have been.
It had no connection by the time the graphic came up. All you have to do is say including superdelegates. It's not like
That's true.
Not
Yes,
like somebody in a typewriter ran out of.
They should all show that. But I think, look, there's a couple of different things being discussed here.
Hold on, let me answer Anna's question just for a quick sec. First of all, so the point is that the delegate total got broke down 7-7, 56-44. Should be, if you were going to do it completely proportionally, it works out almost exactly. It should be 8-6. 8-6 is 57-43. So 56-44 should probably be 8-6. So Bernie's people would have a gripe that they lost 2 delegates there, that it went 8-6 instead of 7-7. However, Wyoming has intricate rules based on, I'm sure, I haven't read it all, based on congressional, I think Wyoming has 1 congressional delegation. It might have 2. But nonetheless, that's how they break it down. It's done in some, it's probably maybe by state, by their legislative delegations broken down. So whatever it was, it came out to 7-7. In Bernie's quest to cut into her delegate lead, now leaving out superdelegates, which I think is 219 if we pay attention to the New York Times, it's meaningless.
Well,
so she's not. She would be behind by 217 instead of 219. So it's essentially meaningless. So they go ahead and include the superdelegates. Superdelegates are there, designed by the party in 1980 or 84, by the way, just to prevent someone like from Bernie Sanders from winning the nomination. That's why
to rig it.
To make it harder for a sort of outsider candidate to come in, a populist candidate to come in. At that time, that was a legitimate fear that would undermine the process and then you get crushed by Republicans. It wasn't thought of in a sinister manner. However, given the fact that it seems irresponsible now. However, only 1 year of superdelegates mattered at all. Actually, no years of superdelegates mattered. It seemed like they might matter in 2008. And what happened? The superdelegates switched. I suspect, again, I hope, again, that if Bernie Sanders overtakes her in a delegate lead, then for her to win by the superdelegates, then that becomes a significant point of contention, although, as you see, Bernie Sanders and his campaign are trying to flip superdelegates. Bernie Sanders entered this campaign knowing those rules. Those rules were clear. They've been there since 1984 in the Democratic Party. The Sanders people are trying to work those delegates. And if he takes the lead, they will continue, and they will have a very powerful case. But right now, to include Wyoming's 4 superdelegates as if those are awarded based on the state and the way the state voted, it seems completely irresponsible.
I think that 9 times out of 10, when they include those, it's to fool people into believing that she won bigger than she did, because they want people to stop thinking that it's a competitive primary. The reason I'm less concerned in this segment is because what they're talking about is how the system is rigged. If the superdelegates are a huge portion of how it's rigged, it seems like, yeah, you should include them, because that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. You shouldn't include the superdelegate, or you should include both, and you should just make it clear. That's all you have to do.
Yes,
Make it
you should
clear.
make it clear.
And most
We say that all the
websites,
time.
that argument has carried the day. Most places now make that incredibly clear.
I still think generally they probably shouldn't include them at all, since they're not actually voted on. Yeah.
So I like that Ben brought up, the incremental difference here, right? So it's really between 2 delegates. And look, if I were running against Hillary, I would fight to make sure that it's completely fair. It shouldn't be even. He did win by 12 points. Even if it means that he gets 8 delegates and she gets 6, that's what's deserved, right? Now, what I care about more is the type of messaging this sends, right? Our elections are so incredibly complicated. I'm talking about general elections with primaries and everything. A lot of people don't understand how they work. A lot of people don't like the way they work. A lot of people feel like the system is rigged and their vote doesn't count. So you see these stories popping up in terms of the Democratic primaries constantly. And I'm worried about the type of message it sends to our voters and whether or not it deters them or discourages them from taking part in our political process. Because right now we already have a problem with political apathy in the country, right? And to see a candidate, whether it be Bernie or someone as horrendous as Donald Trump, to see people get fired up about politics again is great. And now we're kind of starting to see all of these issues within our system that, politicians voted on decades ago that work against so-called outsiders like Bernie. And it drives us crazy. So I understand the frustration and the anger behind it.
Part of that frustration, it's a great point, Anna, and it's the best point that will get made in this argument, I'm sure. But part of that frustration comes from the incompetent way that television reporters on a consistent daily basis cover politics, because they don't understand it. It's hard. So you have to dig in deep, and television doesn't care to devote the resources to that. John King was a reporter for AP. I suspect John King is one of them who doesn't. I don't believe, even though Joe Scarborough was an elected official, was an elected congressman from Florida, that he has particularly any idea. And I like Mika Brzezinski, but I don't think she knows either. I don't think anybody knows. But Mika Brzezinski said your point there, that what was the point of these people, and that Bernie has won 7 in a row now, right? What is the point of these people voting? It did nothing. That's simply not true. She was ahead by exactly 300. She was ahead by 327 delegates, or 329 delegates before this winning streak of 7 states. Now she's ahead by 219. That's 100, and he's 7 states he's won. He made up 110 delegates. He made up a third of what he needed to make up. That's big. They mostly were small states, not entirely.
In states that they continually say are so small that they don't matter. He was still in that, able to make up a third.
But now they were small. It's not like people make that up. I mean, the fact is, you win Texas, you can almost make up that entire difference just by winning that one state. So she simply says, why did these people vote? They voted because they reduced the deficit. They kept the race still alive. It made 110 delegate difference.
She's being hyperbolic there, I think.
Yeah, but then you mislead people, and you encourage the very apathy that Anna eloquently spoke about.
Look, I don't want to turn this into me. I don't care about Mika or Joe. I care to the extent that they are talking about something we talk about. That in various ways, some sort of accidentally, the result of rules being created, some intentionally to corrupt the system. The system has been made purposefully difficult to understand. You rightly say that the superdelegates have never actually overthrown.
It's difficult to understand. I don't. I think it's complicated.
I think the caucuses are they're too complicated.
I agree.
By the way, just to add to that,
I haven't gotten to a single point.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so yes, superdelegates have never yet overturned the system. They still need to be absolutely destroyed. There is no reason to keep around something that is explicitly created to allow you to overturn the will of the voters simply because it hasn't yet destroyed democracy.
I agree.
That should be gone. And unless we talk about this, first of all, if we talk about this nonstop, it's still probably not going to be destroyed. And Mark Halperin, if you continue watching that video, says, they say our superdelegate's going to be gone. I think Mika or Joe says it. And he says, well, if the person who wins wants to, but probably not, being totally true there. Because if Hillary Clinton gets in partially as a result of the superdelegates, either because they actually give her the delegates she needs, or because they've fooled enough people into believing that she has this gigantic lead, that she gets to pretend that she's beating him more than she is, she's not going to want to get rid of that. And we need to talk about this. We need to talk about why she keeps going out there and saying, well, I've got millions more votes than him. Yeah, because you happen to win in primaries and he won a ton of caucuses where far fewer people go out. If they'd all been primaries, the lead in votes would have been much smaller. But she never says that because most people don't understand the difference.
I'll say it, because I don't think it's that hard to explain. She's ahead by 2.4 million votes.
But not really.
Yes, but not really. So if you counted it really, first of all, two things would happen.
First of all, we don't even know how many votes since a lot of the states never release the raw vote totals.
Most do, but some don't. But the fact is, she'd probably be ahead by about over 1 million votes, maybe as high as 1.5 million, and her delegate lead would be much bigger. And so Bernie people need to because you think in a primary he's going to win 75-25? Inconceivable. You're seeing it right now.
In certain states, I think that he might.
Washington? No, she wouldn't. He picked up 47 delegates in Washington because it was a caucus. Because that organization and that passion is conducive to him. I don't want caucuses either.
I'm not even making the case here that they should all be primaries. I'm saying you can't talk about the votes from both as if they have anything to do with each other because they don't. If you are going to talk about a notion that Bernie is getting robbed, then the other person can point out that they're winning actual people. This isn't about the result for any one candidate. This is her, using false language to say that if you count up the votes from a primary and from a caucus, and if one is higher, then she has more support as a result of that. That's not true.
Well, she unquestionably, even if they were all primaries, she'd be ahead. You can't come up with a math.
Yeah, she'd be ahead, and if you look at it nationally, she's up by a couple of points or down by a couple of points, and he's won the last 8 out of 9.
I know, but
they can both point to a lot of things.
Keep it to the same thing. If you're talking about votes, if you want to talk about votes, under any way you want to talk about it, she'd be ahead, and unquestionably, she'd have a bigger delegate lead. So those are the.
I don't know about unquestionably.
Well, I'd love you to try and prove to me that in a primary where he's never gotten anything approaching those numbers, except in Vermont, that he'd win with the numbers that he's won with. In a primary, he wouldn't. You just saw what happened in Wyoming. It was a primary, and it was 56-44 in a state. If that had been a caucus, Bernie would have won 78-22.
Theoretically, but again, he wouldn't have to win by such huge margins to significantly cut into a raw vote lead.
The flip side is, as we just learned, if he'd won Washington 55-45, apparently they would have split the delegates. So,
that's probably true too.
So she'd be ahead by more.
Anyway,
the caucuses suit him, and she is ahead, and of course it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, and the early primary calendar was stacked, not necessarily in any way, but for states that support her.
That's right.
And I'm not saying that she had anything to do with that. It just happened to. And so again, the only thing that matters in terms of total raw votes is after June 7th. If we're going to go the whole way, there's no point in stopping at any arbitrary point along the way and then saying, well, I've had more support so far. Yeah, and you also lost 8 out of the last 9 states. We're going the whole way. We're going all the way to California. So only then does it actually matter.
That's right. I just again, there is a degree of I don't find a lot of high road being taken by anybody making these arguments. But here's what's true. We all agree with. It is a foolish system to elect the person to lead all 50 states and do it so radically differently in each state.
Yes.
This is a federal.
Over such a span of time.
It's a federal election, for crying out loud.
Yep.
We are electing the president of the United States.
Yes.
You can't just arbitrarily have your dumb caucus rule while some other state has a normal, pick a system and have the same system apply to
agree.
each state.
Yes,
I agree.
I couldn't agree more. And also, the one thing I wanted to add was, during the primaries, not only do you have different systems in different states for Democrats, you have different systems for Democrats and Republicans in various states, right? And so for someone who's not sitting around researching our political system on a daily basis,
You shouldn't have to,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a system that's set up
I have to research it, and I pay attention.
Exactly. Well, that's true.
Not that well,
the
apparently.
system in Wyoming, I had no idea how it worked until this whole controversy started, right? So that doesn't speak highly of the way we do things, especially when it comes to picking who our next leader is going to be.